Alrighty, it is a few past noon, so to be respectful of everyone's time, we will go ahead and get started. So I want to welcome you to today's training, LGBTQ plus 101 and Allyship. This is hosted in partnership with Affirmations LGBTQ plus Community Center. So I just want to get some housekeeping out of the way first. If you look at the top of your screen, there is a little face with a hand next to it. You can click on that to raise your hand if you have any questions. Our presenter Kathleen has said, it's okay to stop for questions and ask that. I will also be monitoring the chat, so if you have questions, feel free to drop your questions in there as well. I see that everyone is already muted, so that is wonderful, but just as a reminder, stay muted to cut down on background noise, and we are always happy to see everyone's faces if you are able to turn your camera on. And then I will send out an evaluation at the end of the training. That is how we gather feedback to improve these trainings. So again, I'll send that out at the end of the training in the chat box. And if you're looking for the chat box, it's top right of your screen, right next to that raise hand feature. So without further ado, let me introduce Kathleen Redman, the Director of Programs at Affirmations. So Kathleen, and one more caveat here, I am recording this training. So if anyone's interested in viewing it later or is missing today, it will be available on our website at a later date. So Kathleen, take it away.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you all for being here and for having me. I have some computer issues, so hopefully everything will work okay, but we'll work through it together, and hopefully this will be helpful for you. Like Caitlin said, I'm happy to be interrupted if you have questions. I'm not able to see the chat right now, but she's going to help me manage that. But I want to get you all involved as much as you're willing to get involved, because I think it'll be more beneficial that way. I'll have some questions as we go for you all that can either be ones that you respond directly or things that you ponder, but hopefully that will help make this more engaging than just a straight presentation. And I do have a video a few slides in. I have clicked the button to share computer audio, so hopefully that will work well. But just let me know if there are any issues, or feel free to stop me if you have questions. So with that, I would love for you all to bring yourselves into the space and share a little bit about who you are, what your role is and why you're here, what you're hoping to learn or take away from today's session, and then just how you're feeling this afternoon. So yeah, feel free to jump in the chat if you want to come off mute and share. I'd be happy to hear, but I want to make sure we have space for everybody to be part of this and share the perspective that you're bringing. So I'll pause.
I'm a freshman, and I'm feeling good today. I know little about this topic. I do have friends that are either, well, I would say gay. I'm not sure on the correct language. So I'm really a beginner here today. So I'm happy to be here to learn a lot, and I'm whatever you call the abbreviations or whatever. I'm her, hers, whatever it is. So I said I'm brand new. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. I'm sure you're not the only one who is a little bit maybe unfamiliar with some of the material and the language, and we'll definitely go through that. I want to make sure you leave today feeling more comfortable with the information than you arrived. And certainly everybody's coming from a different place of learning, so I want to make sure that everyone feels safe to answer or ask the questions that they have. I do not have any intention of being judgmental, because I want this to be a learning environment. So feel free to share anything that isn't quite making sense, or you have questions about, and I think that will serve everyone, because I'm sure other people are asking similar questions, whether or not they're interested in sharing.
And then Kathleen, since you're not able to see the chat, I just kind of wanted to share what everyone is saying. People are saying that they hope to learn how they can help LGBTQ plus people in their role. They're having a great day, looking forward to learning. One of the participants said, oh, they're moving so fast, everyone's putting in the chat here, but let's see. Someone says they want to learn a bit more about how to support an individual they work with gender dysphoria. Looking forward to the training. A lot of people feeling positive today. So just wanted to let you know what's going on in the chat.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's definitely a barrier not being able to figure out how I can see the chat. So I appreciate you stepping in.
No problem.
All right. So thank you all for sharing, and we will move forward. So just to give you a brief overview of what we're going to talk about. So we'll talk about common language and developing a common understanding. So that'll include basic terminology, you know, what different identities mean and what is the difference between gender and sex and everything that is rolled into that. We'll talk about coming out and what that looks like. We'll talk about intersectionality because that's an important part of understanding our community and something that I want to make sure we're always focusing on, something I talk about in every training that I do. And then we'll talk about the challenges that LGBTQ+ people face, because I'm sure in many of your roles you will be in a supportive capacity. So it would be useful to know what some of the barriers are and potentially how you can help. And that's where allyship and inclusive language comes in. So I'll give you lots of ideas for how to be an ally, what it means to be an ally, and hopefully that will leave you with some action items, some ideas that you can take away and really implement in your working lives as well as your personal lives. So I always like to start with a little bit of data to ground us because there's sometimes a misunderstanding about how large our community actually is. It is relatively small compared to the overall population of the United States, but we are a pretty significant part of the community. And very often people don't realize that we are your neighbors, we're your coworkers, your friends, and just because you don't know the identity of somebody doesn't mean they aren't part of our community. So just taking Michigan, for example, Michigan has over 300,000 people who are over the age of 13 who identify as LGBTQ+, and certainly that is a low number because many members of our community do not feel comfortable necessarily being out or expressing their identity, especially in surveys or in other formats where they aren't sure how it's going to be received or might impact them, or depending on what stage of coming out or grappling with their identity that they are in. And of course, we'll talk about all of those issues, but I wanted to make sure we got a picture of how many of us there actually are. And I have certainly seen some data coming out about Gen Z identifying at a higher percentage of their overall generational population than prior generations. So I think our percentage of the population overall is going to be increasing over time. And I think that's more of a result of the development of a safer culture and society, that people have a better understanding of who we are, what that means, or maybe more open to themselves to exploring that. And so I think it's more of that environmental impact and learning and growing and having more support than it is like some people may frame it as everyone's just jumping on the bandwagon. And that I don't take any stock in that. I don't think that's true at all. So I think it's important to understand that we are a significant part of the population and that will continue to grow. So it's a good space for you all to start learning and be prepared to understand a little bit better. So hopefully as time goes on, it becomes more and more comfortable, less unusual or unfamiliar, and then that serves all of us, I think, in the long run. So we'll jump right into the content. So I always like to start talking about the differences between sex and gender. There's certainly quite a bit of overlap between them, but especially when you're thinking about the LGBTQ+ community and all the various identities that people have within our community, it's important to understand the differences between these two terms because they do impact our experiences. And especially from my perspective, as part of an organization that serves our community, it's really important that we know what those differences are and how that can play out in people's lives. So to start with sex, that we are defining as the biological characteristics that are assigned to a person based on their chromosomes and body type. So this is what is on official documentation, on your birth certificate, and the most common way we have thought about sex and gender has typically been more about sex. So that is your genitalia, your physical body type, chromosomes, everything biologically sex about an individual. So typically we think of it as two options, male and female. So that is typical for the United States. Certainly there are other cultures that have a different understanding of sex or a broader understanding of it, but male and female are the most common. But I want to make sure that we mention that intersex is another sex assigned at birth, and those individuals are members of the LGBTQ+ community, and they are individuals who are born with what some might describe as ambiguous genitalia or an ambiguous body type, and could sort of go either way to male or female on those birth certificates. But this is another option that can also go on those forms. But it can create a problem for many folks because, especially in the past, but even today, many physicians or parents or guardians or whoever's in the room when a child is born may think that an intersex person should be put in either the male or the female category. They might have the documentation reflect that, which can be a form of erasure of their identity. But there's also another layer that has happened more in the past and less often now of surgical or other medical procedures taking place in order to establish that sex, either male or female, that those adults in the room choose for that child. And so that can create a lot of problems for intersex folks because not only are they grappling with their identity and going through life and learning how to be a fully functioning, healthy, happy adult, but they're also trying to figure out, like, who am I? And these decisions were made about my body without my consent. And it can create a lot of challenges. And often they're left out of conversations, even in our community, and that can further create problems. So I want to make sure that we are talking about intersex people and lifting them up as a perfectly valid, natural, normal part of our community and of society. And we can do more collectively to provide support and understanding for these folks. So shifting to gender, gender we're defining as a person's perception of who they are as a person, and it's something that they define for themselves. So certainly there can be a lot of overlap for many folks. Their gender identity aligns with the sex that they were assigned at birth. We'll talk about what the term that we can use to describe those folks. But for a lot of people, it's more complicated than that. They have different relationships with their gender than with their sex. So the important understanding is sex is a biological characteristic and gender is very much a person's identity. It's something that they define for themselves. So in Western societies in the United States, often we see this again in a binary lens of man and woman. These are the two genders, these are the two options. But what we have seen is that that's not the reality. And many folks have different identities that overlap between man and woman, that have elements of both, that may switch from day to day, how they identify. And I want to make sure I also note that it's not all cultures and societies that have this binary understanding of gender. There are many cultures around the world that have a broader understanding of it, a deeper understanding of what it means to hold different gender identities. So I would definitely encourage you all to look into that if you're curious about what other cultures look at when they think about gender, what they discuss and how they define it. But for one example, there are many Native and Indigenous communities that have another gender identity, a two-spirit person, and that is more than just gender identity. It sort of transcends gender. And again, this is my sort of white person's perspective on it, so I would definitely encourage you to look for resources coming from those communities to get a better sense of what a two-spirit person is, because it is a spiritual and important role in societies. And I can only bring my perspective to it, but I want to make sure that we are considering that there are different understandings of gender depending on what communities that you are in. And all of those are perfectly valid and normal ways of thinking about the world. We're just opening our eyes a little bit to more diverse ways of thinking. So then when we talk about gender, as I've mentioned, there's a lot of different ways that people can define it for themselves, but it's a spectrum, and there's a lot of different ways that people can express their gender in addition to identity. So when we talk about gender identity, that can be a term that someone uses to describe themselves, but the way they express that gender identity can be different. So just because there are two women who identify as women doesn't mean that they express that gender in the same way. One might dress more traditionally feminine, one might dress more androgynous or traditionally masculine, or depending on the context or how they're feeling that day. And those people are both women and perfectly welcome to define who they are for themselves. It doesn't make them less of a woman because they don't dress and present themselves identically to another person who identifies as a woman. So I think that's an important piece of the puzzle, is understanding those differences. So then I want to give some definitions of some of the more common gender identities, the ones you might be more likely to encounter, but there are many, many more beyond just these three. Sometimes these three are what are considered umbrella terms, or they sort of encapsulate a larger, more diverse set of identities, but with some shared experiences. So I'll start from the top. I mentioned earlier that for some people, the sex they were assigned at birth and their gender identity align, and the term for that is cisgender. So that's the top term there. So that refers to somebody whose gender identity aligns with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So for example, I am a cisgender woman. I was born female. I identify as a woman. Therefore, there is alignment there. It doesn't, again, mean that I express my gender the same way that other people might, but it just expresses that alignment between my gender identity and the sex that I was assigned at birth. So transgender refers to somebody whose gender identity does not align with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So people may go through a transition process. We'll talk a little bit about that. But that essentially means, for example, if somebody is born male and that's what their official documents say, but as they are conscious of their identity and how they want to move through the world, and they come to an understanding that they are actually a woman, that's how they see themselves, who they are. It's completely valid, and many folks feel that way. It just hasn't always been a safe space to explore that. But that person would be considered transgender if that alignment of their own identity is not present with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So trans people have infinite expressions as well about how they want to transition, how they express their identity, but they're a really important part of our community. And certainly if you look at health statistics and outcomes, many transgender people in our community face a lot of barriers, especially if we take an intersectional lens. And we'll talk about intersectionality later. So the last one on the list is non-binary. There's some other terms that can express a similar identity, but it essentially means someone who doesn't fit into the binary understanding of gender, as in man and woman. So that could mean that they don't want to be associated with gender at all. They feel entirely disconnected from gender. It can mean that they feel connected to both man and woman and want to be both, or feel that they are both. Maybe it varies on a daily basis. Maybe there's a flexibility there in their mind of fluidity. So some other terms you might hear that are similar to non-binary, though there are certainly differences between them, are gender non-conforming, gender expansive, agender. So there are lots of different terms that can have some overlap with non-binary, but non-binary is its own individual identity as well. So these are the most common terms you will likely come across to refer to somebody's gender identity. And so for the vast majority of the population, cisgender is going to be the term that they would use. So like I said, I use cisgender because the sex I was assigned at birth and my gender identity align, regardless of how I express that identity. So that will likely be the case for most people. So if you're wondering which one am I, but you don't feel like you've been grappling with what gender means, or feel a misalignment between what you were assigned at birth and who you are, you will most likely be cisgender, but that is completely for you to decide. It can change depending on what you learn about yourself, how you explore that gender. So I want to talk a little bit about what transitioning means. This is most often used to talk about the experiences of transgender individuals or non-binary individuals, but especially transgender individuals. And it refers to a social and or a medical term for aligning one's body or expression with their gender identity. So if you come to the realization at some point in childhood or later that you are a trans person, you may make the decision to transition who you have been expressing yourself as before to who you truly are and have come to realize now. So it can be social or medical. So what social transitioning looks like could be changing your name, changing the pronouns that you would like others to use to talk about you, could be the way that you present yourself, the clothes that you wear, hair, makeup, any of those things can fit under the social transition category. A medical transition can refer to taking hormones, can be surgeries, top surgeries, surgeries to align your physical body with your gender identity. But what's really important to know about transitioning is that it's a different experience for everybody, and not everyone is going to transition the same way or transition at all. So you have to be open to other people defining what they want to do for themselves. And it's really not any of our business how someone else chooses to transition based on what is right for them. So some people choose not to. They just want to know and accept in themselves who they are, and that's perfectly acceptable. And some want to go through a social and a medical transition to fully align their physical body with who they are, and including on forms, and that is equally acceptable. So just remember that if somebody is transitioning in any way, shape, or form, that is perfectly acceptable. It can be an incredibly difficult, traumatic process for many people, especially if they don't have social support. So if you can be a supportive person for somebody who's going through any form of transition, that could be really helpful for them. But it's important to let those folks take the lead and determine how, if they want to transition, when, and all of those questions. So that's my information about transitioning right now. But again, there's lots of materials out there on the internet. We could have further conversations about what that looks like. But again, I, as a cisgender person, have a limited understanding of what that really means. I can talk about it from an academic perspective. I can talk about it from what I've heard from other folks who identify as trans and who have been willing to share with me. But I am biased and privileged in this respect. So if you want real good information about what transitioning looks like, or more information about the trans community, I would really encourage you to look for some resources by trans individuals about their experience, whatever that could look like. So I want to talk a little bit about pronouns. I know that's an area of a lot of confusion for many people, especially if you're not used to thinking about pronouns. For many of us, it's something that is just a regular part of our everyday lives. We don't think about it, but it's incredibly important for trans individuals, for non-binary individuals. So I want to take some time to talk through that to make sure everybody has a better understanding of why pronouns are really important. So going back to maybe grammar school, elementary school, early education, pronouns refer to a word that substitutes a noun, so that you're not repeating the same noun over and over again in the same sentence. So the most common pronouns for an individual have been she, her, and hers, and he, him, and his. But they, them, and theirs has been typically used for multiple people, like they are going to the party as in a group of people. But what's important to understand about our community is that now many folks are using they, them, theirs in a singular sense to refer to their identity if they don't feel like the traditionally feminine or masculine pronouns align with them. There are many, many more pronouns that are considered gender neutral. Some are completely new words or altogether, but I would definitely encourage you to check out some resources on the internet about what other pronouns are out there. But we can very often make assumptions about what pronouns to use for somebody, and in many cases it's just an instinctive thing. We don't consciously think about it, we just use the pronouns because that's what we're used to. But these are important to have a more open understanding about, because it can have a real impact on somebody's lived experience. So it's best to avoid making assumptions about somebody when you see them on the street, for example, or walking into a room. If you see someone who you think looks like how you would define a man, it's better to not assume that that is who they are and that they want you to refer to them as he or him when you're talking about that person instead of directly to them. So I do have a video that'll help explain this a little bit better, and I'd be happy to have more conversations about it. But this is an important part of understanding and supporting our community. So again, pronouns are incredibly important to many people, can impact their well-being, it can impact their safety, and at the end of the day, it's about creating a respectful and inclusive space for folks. So it may seem like something small to many of us who are cisgender and haven't had to really think about it much, but it is incredibly important, and it can be life and death for people, and that's not an exaggeration. So it's important to understand that if it takes you some practice and some effort to get comfortable with somebody's pronouns that may not be what you expected them to be, that is worth the effort, in my opinion, because it could mean the difference between life and death for somebody. And even if it doesn't mean the difference between life and death, it's a matter of respect and helping people feel welcome and safe and being able to get the care that they need. Okay, so here's my video. Let's see if it works. Again, my computer is slow, so that could be part of the issue. Oh. Are you seeing the new window pop up, or is it still on the PowerPoint?
It's still on the PowerPoint.
Okay. Because it should be able to play in the window, but it might not. Let me see.
We can just see your PowerPoint view right now.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this, and then I'm going to share the other. It's working on it.
And Kathleen, we do see the video, but now I don't hear any sound, and I believe there was sound.
Yes. I'm sorry.
That is okay, no problem.
You all are so patient, and I really appreciate it. Let's try this again.
Watch the world. Here's Tristan from the Pride Center of Edmonton.
I'd like to teach people about gender identity and how to use pronouns correctly. First off, let's talk about the difference between sex and gender identity. Sex is something that is assigned at birth. When the medical professional says, "It's a boy," or "It's a girl," they are basing this off of your physical anatomy, or your sex. Gender identity is a person's experience of their own gender. Most people's gender identity aligns with the sex they were assigned at birth. The term for this is cisgender, from the Latin cis, meaning on this side of. Someone who is transgender, or gender non-binary, however, has a gender identity that does not align with the sex they were assigned at birth. Transgender and non-binary people can experience their gender in a variety of ways. Some transgender people may identify strongly with the gender. Some may feel disconnected from masculine and feminine genders, while others may experience their gender as a combination of both. Here's a quick refresher on grammar. Pronouns are words we use to refer to someone in place of a name. Some are tied to a specific gender, like he, him, his, and she, her, hers. Others, like they, them, theirs, are gender neutral. Some transgender people will use gendered pronouns as they affirm their gender identity. However, some transgender and gender non-binary folks will use gender-neutral pronouns. It's important to consider that the pronouns that feel comfortable for one person might not be for another. Okay, so why is this important? You probably have an expectation about what pronouns people refer to you by, and so do most transgender or gender non-binary people. Using someone's pronouns correctly is important because pronouns correspond with a person's gender. When pronouns are used incorrectly, we may risk misgendering them. Misgendering is when someone uses the wrong name or pronoun to describe someone else. This can cause distress for the person who is misgendered because they may feel that their gender identity is not validated and respected. Misgendering can also create a risk to someone's safety by outing that person to others. Unfortunately, some people purposely misgender others to insult them. Using the correct name and pronoun is about showing basic respect. If you're not sure, you can just ask. A great way to ask someone's pronoun when you first meet them is to say your name, state your pronouns, then ask the person you're meeting with what their name and pronouns are. Hi, my name is Tristan. I use he, him, his pronouns. What is your name and pronouns? Hi, my name is Jordan, and I use they, them, theirs pronouns. Thank you for asking. Once you know someone's pronouns, you will know how to refer to them when speaking to others. Hey everyone, this is Jordan. They're a new friend of mine. We all make mistakes though. If you slip up, apologize, and try to avoid being defensive. Hey everyone, this is Jordan. He's a new friend of mine. Oh, I mean, they're a new friend of mine. Sorry, Jordan. No worries, thanks. Getting someone's gender right is on you, not the transgender or non-binary person. Try not to make assumptions about someone's gender identity. You don't know someone's pronouns until they tell you. Pronouns are something important that most people don't think about. However, pronouns are extra important to many transgender and non-binary folks as it affirms their gender identity. Using someone's correct pronouns is important and validated. It's easy to get it right if you avoid making assumptions. In the end, this all comes down to treating each other with a little care and respect.
Okay, so I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoint. Obviously, that covered a lot of things that I had already gone through, but sometimes having a different medium to provide the same information can be helpful. So my hope in sharing that was that it would add a different way of thinking about it and also continue with some examples about how you can use pronouns, because it can be new for a lot of folks, and more examples can always help. So one of the things that came up in that video before we get into practicing is how you can respond if you accidentally use the wrong pronouns, which happens fairly often. I have done it before. I know many people who have. So it's important to be prepared in case that happens. And I've heard different things from different folks who are part of the trans community or non-binary individuals. And some people have been telling me that it's often better to even not apologize if you make a mistake, to just correct yourself and thank them if they correct you, so that you're not putting the burden of apologizing or consoling you, making you feel better onto that individual who is the person who was wronged in this scenario. So I think that's a good way of thinking about it, but certainly I can apologize on instinct very quickly and not even realize it. So there are multiple ways you can handle it, but the main argument is to not spend too much energy on it by apologizing and looking for support to make you feel better, because that switches the energy to comforting you instead of making sure that the person who is misgendered is correctly gendered and the right pronouns are used. So I want to give everyone an opportunity to practice a little bit. Should be fairly safe. You don't need to come on camera or unmute yourself if that's not comfortable. But if everyone would be willing to share in the chat, if you're comfortable, what your name and pronouns are, just as a means of getting used to what that might look like for you. So these are a couple examples that you can use. There are other ways that you can express it if something feels like it might make more sense. But one thing that I encourage people to do when they're thinking about pronouns and when they're expressing theirs is to avoid using the term preferred pronouns. I know that was more commonly used recently, but it can give the impression that it's an option, that it's not a requirement for somebody, that it's not important. So you can use the right ones or not, and both are fine, which is not the case. So it's better to just say, what are somebody's pronouns, or these are their pronouns, rather than saying, what are your preferred pronouns, or what is this person's preferred pronouns. So while you all are adding things in the chat, I can sort of demonstrate. So I will often say, my name is Kathleen and my pronouns are she, her, hers, or my name is Kathleen and I use she, her, hers pronouns. So something as simple as that, just added to your normal introduction, can be really helpful. So I'll give you all a little bit of time to put things in the chat, and please let me know when people have had a chance to get in there.
Yeah, we do. A lot of people are practicing and they're still rolling in. So whenever you are ready to move on, I think everyone is comfortable with that.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we're going to switch focus a little bit away from gender, though certainly gender has an impact on sexuality and sexual orientation, but I want to make sure we're also covering some of the other letters in LGBTQ+. So sexuality and sexual orientation refers to who you are physically attracted to or sexually attracted to. It's another term that we choose ourselves, that we define for ourselves, and not something that someone can define for us. And there's a lot of fluidity within these terms. They can change over time for somebody. They can change depending on the context that they're in. If maybe one term feels more comfortable with a certain group of people, if you think they might be more open to that term. So there's a lot of variety in the words people use to identify themselves in terms of sexual orientation. And there are many more than I have listed here, but these are some of the more common ones that you might come across. But again, there are many, many more. I don't even know all of them. The list grows on a regular basis. And I think that's wonderful, because even though it means that it's hard for me to memorize them all, it means that people are creating language to describe who they are as an individual. And maybe that is a shared language that somebody else feels really fits them. And so I think that only serves to help our community feel more comfortable in their own skin and expressing who they are and living their full lives. So I'm not going to go through each of these terms individually. If you're curious about any of them or haven't heard them before, you can definitely look them up. There's lots of resources on the internet, but these are the most common ones. And then the other note I want to make is the difference between sexual attraction and romantic attraction. So very often there is overlap between the two, that you are sexually attracted to the same gender or genders as you are romantically attracted to. But for some people, that is not the case. There may be differences between those two. And for asexual people who don't experience sexual attraction, that does not mean that they don't experience romantic attraction. So it's best to not assume that just because someone is asexual that they aren't interested in a romantic relationship, because they may be interested in a romantic relationship, just one that wouldn't necessarily have a sexual component to it. So again, it really depends on the person. It's important to let individuals take the lead on the terms that they use for themselves, and in defining how they want to express that. So I want to take some time to talk specifically about the term queer, which is often one of the letters, the Q in LGBTQ+. Sometimes that Q refers to questioning. It really depends on who you talk to. But queer is a term that we're all, I'm sure, hearing quite a bit, but has a really complicated history. And so it's important that we have a deeper understanding of this term specifically, because it can be very harmful for folks. So it's not one that we can just use broadly and expect that everyone will be comfortable with. So for many folks, including I'm sure people who are part of this call today, queer was used in a derogatory manner to talk in a negative way about another person. It could be used in hate speech, as part of discrimination, or just bullying. And so for many folks, it's a very harmful, negative term that has a lot of negative power to it. So that's why not everyone is very comfortable with that terminology. But on the other hand, there are a lot of people in our community who are trying to reclaim that term, which is something that happens in many different communities. The process of taking a word that has been used in a disempowering, harmful way, and take that back and say, this is my term now, I'm using it to empower myself. This is a term that I want, and I will use it for myself so that you can't use it against me. So that happens in many different communities, and that is pretty much what's happening with the term queer. So there are many members of our community who are reclaiming that term and using it as an empowering term, or a way of expressing their sexual orientation. So for example, I use the term queer to define my own sexual orientation because I feel it best fits me and I'm most comfortable with that. But I know that many people are not comfortable with that term, so I wouldn't broadly use it to refer to groups of people. So it's important to be careful about how you use it, and to only really use it with people you know are comfortable with it. And that could mean that they have used it themselves, or that's a term they use to define their own sexual orientation. But let other people take the lead on that, especially if you're an ally, if you're not part of the LGBTQ+ community. I would avoid using this term in general, because it can be very harmful and even triggering for some folks who have experienced trauma, either as a result of this term or where this term was used in a traumatic event. So that's why I wanted to call out this one specifically, because it has a complicated history, especially with older generations of our community. So just be careful with it.
Kathleen, we do have a hand raised. So Sherry, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, go ahead.
Yes, I'm still not understanding who would use the word queer in a positive manner, reclaiming it. What are some other things about them? Are they lesbians? Are they gay? What makes someone want to claim the title queer in a positive way? How does it identify? What is it identifying?
Okay, I can answer that from my perspective, since that's a term that I use to define for myself, but I want to make the caveat that not everyone who uses that term may define it in the same way as I do. So for me, it means that I'm attracted to people regardless of their gender, and it also has a connection to my gender identity. I like that queer is open and fluid. It feels like a larger box instead of a smaller box. So like when I first came out, I identified as bisexual, and I still feel some connection to that term, but the more I heard the term queer, which is often used to describe someone who's attracted to multiple genders, it just felt like a better fit to me. And certainly terms like pansexual can mean or means attraction to people regardless of gender, people of all gender identities, but that one just didn't fit for me. So there's not a clear answer on why someone might choose that term versus another. It just depends on what feels like it fits. And at least for me, the term queer feels like it fits who I am better than some of those other terms. Does that help?
Yes, it helps quite a bit, but I'm still not understanding what like the definition of queer is. I understand how you're saying being attracted to multiple sexes instead of just saying bisexual, queer might fit, but I'm not understanding why queer fits. Like what, I'm not really understanding what queer means.
And I can't give you a clear definition of why it fits to me. It's one of those things that just, it does. But I think it really depends on the person. But what I personally like about it is its openness, and it just feels better. And I know that it isn't probably as helpful as it could be, but there might be some materials online or some groups that have talked about it that might give a better definition of what that means. But for me, it means attraction to multiple genders, to all genders, and it can also mean some fluidity in terms of my gender identity. So I can define myself as queer, and that feels like it encapsulates me better than just one of those other terms might. So.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have a clear definition, but I think that's part of the nature of that word. Some people like the ambiguity of it, and that's the case. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions about any of those terms so far?
We don't have any questions in the chat, but if anyone would like to unmute and ask a question, feel free.
Okay. So I'll pause for just a few seconds in case somebody is unmuting.
Just going back to the pronouns and talking about that content, I think it's an awesome teaching opportunity as well for maybe your peers in whatever setting you're working in that might not be, like your coworkers, other staff members that don't have familiarity with pronouns, or that pronouns that might not match up with what they're visually seeing. But hearing you and seeing you respect that person's identified pronouns, and that could be a teaching opportunity for another person that didn't get the chance to take a class like this, you know.
Sure.
So
yeah, that's a
I
great
appreciate
point.
that.
Yeah, that's a form of allyship. And sometimes somebody might have more trust in you than they would in somebody else or in me, and may not feel comfortable asking some of those questions. But if you have that trusting relationship and have the knowledge to help them sort of understand it, that can be beneficial for that individual and also for the broader community, because that's one more person that understands us a little bit better, is more prepared to support us. So that's a really great point. Thank you for bringing that up. So I'm going to talk briefly about the genderbread person. So this is one of a few different visuals that have been developed over time to try to describe the relationships between identity, attraction, sex, expression, because it can be kind of confusing. So this is one. There are certainly others. There's a unicorn, there's an umbrella. So some people prefer different visuals over others, but I like the genderbread person. I put the link there. It evolves over time. So this is the most recent version that I have seen, and the development of it happens through feedback from members of the community. So they'll learn some more about what people like and don't like, and then they will adapt it. So that's one of the things I like about this particular visual. And we won't spend a lot of time going through the details of it, but it tries to get across that identity and expression and attraction and sexual orientation, all of that certainly have some connections, but they are not equal. And so each person can have some in common with another person. They could have different versions of it, different understandings of it. And so it's important to understand that to think outside the binary, that's the common theme, and that there are connections between all of these different aspects of our identities in terms of gender and sexual orientation, but that it's going to be different for everybody because there's a lot of different ways you can define it, especially if you think about it on a spectrum, which is how this defines it. So you could be a little more feminine than somebody else is and still share the same identity, or maybe one day you're more masculine. It just sort of depends on the person. So I would definitely encourage you to check out this resource if you're looking for some more information. I know they have some worksheets and other tools to help understand this visual, but I wanted to bring this up as an additional resource in case folks are looking for some more information. So now I want to talk a little bit about what coming out means. It's a term we probably hear pretty often, including in media, books, newspapers, and things like that. And more often than not, in many mediums, coming out is referred to as like one time. It happens, this person came out, it's done, they're out of the closet, that phase is over with. But it's not actually that way. It can happen and does happen many, many times over somebody's life. And the way that they come out can vary depending on the situation and how they're feeling. So it's a never-ending process. And the reason it's never-ending is because you go through all this emotional labor often to come out to somebody, often your family, however you define your family, your close friends, people that you trust first, for most people. And then that's great, hopefully, but then if you enter a different context, like your workplace or school, or you're on the street somewhere, then you are grappling with whether or not you come out again to these people. Are you feeling up for it, in that day? So for example, I made the decision today to come out to all of you because I hoped that it would help get a better understanding of what some of these terms mean. And again, I can only speak from my perspective, really, with full confidence and experience. And so if I can share a little bit about who I am, knowing that I'm not going to say something wrong or accidentally misrepresent somebody, hopefully that will help you better understand our community. But that was a decision that I made to trust you all with that information. So it's up to each individual, and some days I just don't have the energy to come out to somebody, or it just doesn't feel right in context. Like if I'm in a meeting with a new partner, I'm not gonna be like, oh, by the way, I'm queer, nice to meet you, because it doesn't always fit. So they may not know. And certainly working for an organization like the one I work for can, lend itself a little bit, but it's important to understand that it's different for everybody. It changes on the day, depending on the context, who's in the room, but it should only be initiated by the person who is coming out, because it can be incredibly harmful for somebody to be outed by somebody else, because it takes power away from them for something that's very important. It can also be a risk to their safety, because you don't know if the person that you're telling about someone else's identity is going to be accepting, or if they're going to have a negative reaction or even a violent reaction. So it's really important to be careful about how you share that information, and to only do it if you have the express permission of the person whose identity you would be sharing. And most often there wouldn't be a context that you would need to share that information, because it's rarely relevant to a story you're telling about somebody or information you're providing about somebody. But always take the lead of the individual who is coming out and let them define what terms that you are allowed to use, in what context, and what the follow-up is. Because it can be incredibly harmful, and it's a really important part of somebody's journey, because often getting to the point of coming out is incredibly difficult and can be even traumatic. So if somebody finally gets to that point and they're willing to share that, to then have that power taken from them by someone they trusted, can be really harmful for somebody and could ruin a relationship. So another important thing to understand about coming out is that if somebody comes out to you, it's an honor. They are trusting you with something precious, with something they fought for. So treat it as such. Treat it as an honor. Thank them for sharing it. Offer your support. There are lots of great ways to respond to somebody who is coming out to help create a safe environment. And in that vein, I want to give you all a chance to think about what you might do if somebody comes out to you, and maybe someone has already come out to you. Don't think about me. Maybe someone aside from me has come out to you. But what would your reaction be if you were, in a face-to-face situation or on the phone and someone that you knew came out to you? So if you want to share that in the chat or come off mute, maybe what you think you might do or what you have done in the past, just to give folks some ideas about how you can respond in a respectful, loving way. I'll pause for a little bit longer just in case someone is hesitant to jump in but thinking about it, but I can definitely give you some examples. And if you're more comfortable answering the second question about how you can create a safe environment for somebody to come out, that's also welcome too.
This is Sherry Rushman again. I have had a lot of, and I think I'm saying this right, transgender individuals in my trainings. Mm-hmm. And it's very important to them that I use the correct pronouns. Sometimes you can slip up if their voice sounds male, but they are identifying with a female gender. Mm-hmm. And want to be called she, her. So I have found that, but I've also found that they're very willing to educate the people in the training, and they're very willing to say their preference. But it does feel bad when they've shared their preference quite a bit and you still use the wrong pronoun. Mm-hmm. It's really embarrassing, and it does seem disrespectful to them. I mean, then they're saying, please use this pronoun, So it does take practice. You need to remember that just because someone has a male sounding voice does not mean they're identifying as male at all. Right. And I'm really thankful for this course today because I do have individuals in my trainings quite a bit like that. And there's a lot going on. Like, some people are not comfortable with some of the bathroom situations and different things that go on at a training. So this kind of education is very important for a trainer, so that they can be very respectful and sensitive and kind of avoid some stuff that could happen that would make the person feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because it can be very difficult for somebody to share something very personal about themselves, and certainly those of us who are in a training capacity are prepared for those questions, and we want to answer them because, at least from my perspective, my hope is that if you all can share the honest questions that you have, and if I can help create some better understanding, that might make it easier for someone else that you might encounter in the future, because then you would be more prepared and have your questions asked, and you wouldn't necessarily have to ask that person, because not all people in the community that you might come in contact with are going to be interested in having those conversations and educating you, because as allies, it's really on us to educate ourselves at the end of the day and seek out resources, practice in our spare time, because it can take some practice to get used to using a different pronoun than you expect, especially if all of this is new to you, or you've known someone for a long time and we're used to one pronoun and now you're getting familiar with something else. That's a pretty common experience. So what I tell folks is to do your research on your spare time to make sure you are learning a little bit and not putting all of the weight of education for you onto somebody else who's just trying to live their lives, but seek out people like me who are prepared to answer those questions and to be a resource, you know, whatever resources are on the internet. And if it helps to practice in your spare time when you're not with somebody, that can be beneficial. So for example, my fiance and I will practice using one of our friends' pronouns because they use they, them pronouns. And sometimes we can slip up. So when we're talking about them, we'll practice using the correct pronouns. If one of us slips up, we'll correct the other. And that way we're helping each other learn so that when we're with our friend, they don't have to worry about us misgendering them, and we don't have to worry as much either because we're doing the work on our time to really make sure that we're giving them that respect and not putting a burden on them. So it can certainly be a process and can take some work, but if we are truly interested in being allies, that's the work of an ally. That's how you truly be one rather than calling yourself an ally. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But just in the interest of time, I want to pause and see if there's anything in the chat that people put in that would like to be shared, or if I should move on and share some of my suggestions.
We do have a few comments in the chat that I will share. Just people saying that they would thank those people for feeling comfortable to disclose that information with them, continue being supportive. And this one might be a question or a statement, interpret it as you will, but this person has a family member who has previously come out, and I think they're looking for a way to broach the subject of you know, what pronouns, you know, they want to use. She says maybe that she can just come out using her own gender pronouns as a way to kind of broach that subject.
Yeah, that's great. That's a good way to create some space because it shows that you understand the importance of them and are open to using the right gender pronouns for somebody. So I think starting with your own is good. It depends on your relationship with the person. If you have the kind of relationship where you can check in and say, you know, I know that you recently came out and I want to make sure that I am being respectful and using the right pronouns for you. Would you mind sharing what pronouns you'd like me to use right now? Or if you decide at some point to change your pronouns, just let me know. I just want to make sure I'm using the right language. That can be a way to open the conversation and get that information so that you're using the right ones. That's something that I've done in the past for friends who were in the early stages of grappling with their gender identity and they weren't sure like where they fit or what pronouns they wanted to use. I just, you know, told them I support you no matter what. I'm here for you. Just let me know if at any point you would like me to use different pronouns than what I've been using in the past, and I would be happy to use those for you. So sometimes that can just give them an open door, and maybe if they're not ready in that moment to share it, they'll at least know that you're open to that conversation and want to be supportive. So that can make a big difference for somebody. So all of your comments have been really helpful and great. Certainly every individual is different and might be looking for something different when they're coming out to somebody, but in general, you can't really go wrong with just being supportive, thanking them, asking if there's anything you can do to help, or if you need to use different pronouns, things like that. Telling them you still love them and care about them and just want to be supportive can make a big difference. One of the things I really liked when I came out to one of my friends was they said, congratulations, like welcome to the community. And that made me feel really great because I didn't always get good responses from people, even if they had good intentions. So there's a lot of different ways you can respond, but always take the other person's lead. And if you're not sure, just ask how you can help, ask what they need from you and let them take the lead on that. So all of these things can help create a safe environment, can help you respond well when somebody comes out to you, and you can really be a resource. Many studies have shown that having even one person in your life who is supportive can make a big difference in your overall well-being and in your long-term health outcomes. So you could be that one person for somebody and not even realize it. So just try to remember that when somebody's sharing something with you or when you learn something about someone, that you could be a real ally for them and a resource that could make a big difference in their lives. And that serves everyone to have more happy, healthy people moving in the world. So thank you all for sharing. I want to move on to talk about intersectionality. I've mentioned it before, but I think it's important part of this conversation. So, we talk about the LGBTQ plus community and the different identities that fit under there, but we are not only one identity that we hold at any given time. I'm never just queer. I'm never just a woman. I am all of the different identities that I hold. And that goes for race and ethnicity, religion, country of origin, first language. There's lots of different identities that we all hold that make up who we are as a person. And certainly none of us are just our identities, but they're a big part of us. And it affects how we move through the world, how people interact with us, the opportunities that we have, the way we see ourselves, the spaces that we want to enter. It's a really important part of who we are as humans. And so we have to take an intersectional lens when we're talking about the LGBTQ plus community, just like when we talk about all other communities, because we need to be mindful and respectful of all those experiences. And especially when we're talking about communities that are marginalized, that face challenges and oppression and discrimination in their daily lives, we have to be really respectful and mindful of that history and that context. So somebody who is a Black trans woman will not have the same experience as someone who's a white trans woman, because that white person has white privilege, and that helps them in some spaces move through the world. Now, certainly trans white women have a lot of barriers as well, and I don't want to diminish everyone's individual experience. We all go through challenges in life. Most people don't know what we're carrying with us on a regular basis, but those identities have a real impact on how other people see us and how successful we can be in the opportunities that we have. So when we're talking about our community, we need to be mindful of all those other identities that people hold. And especially in my role as the director of programs at Affirmations, it's critical for me to have an understanding of this and to bring that lens to everything that we do. Are we truly creating a safe, affirming, inclusive space for everybody in consideration of their intersectional identities? Are we helping to remove barriers for people that maybe people with disabilities face, that people who are able-bodied don't? So there's a lot that goes into this, but it's really important to understand that the more marginalized identity somebody has, the more oppression they might face, or discrimination. It can all compound to create larger and larger weights that people need to carry around as they move through the world. And so we can be supportive and respectful of that and avoid making assumptions about somebody's experience based on what we see about them or what we know about them. So that's an important perspective to keep in general as we move through the world. And especially when we think about the LGBTQ plus community, because we have that marginalized identity based on gender identity or sexual orientation that can result in discrimination. But then we have those other aspects of who we are. And if we have more of those identities that are facing discrimination in different contexts, the things that we're going to face are going to be more difficult, and we may need more support, or we may just need more, empathy. So I want to move that into talking about some challenges that many members of our community face. So often we face discrimination in pretty much all aspects of life. So that can include employment, housing, healthcare, and so on. And certainly none of these aspects of life are in silos. So for example, if you can't get a job because you're a trans person and people won't hire you because of their own biases, or because the identity or the name that's on your driver's license doesn't match the name that you use because you haven't been able to change it yet. Not being able to get that job can mean you can't afford housing or find good housing. Again, with all those aspects of discrimination that could come into play, which could then impact your health care and the kind of care that you can receive. So it's all interconnected, but it can have a real impact on many people's lives. And certainly members of our trans community, people of color in our community, people with disabilities face a lot of barriers to living happy, healthy, fully realized existences for themselves. So the discrimination can reduce the opportunities that we face and can create a greater risk for adverse outcomes. So that can include short-term and long-term impacts on health. We'll talk specifically about health because I think it's important to highlight that, because that's a big barrier for a lot of folks. But impacts on our health can impact everything, as you know. If you have real major health challenges or even minor ones that can impact your ability to do your job or to get an education or to be present with your family. Overall, it can impact your well-being. And that includes mental and physical health. There's a lot of history of mental and behavioral health issues within our community, and that's in part a result of trauma. Many members of our community have gone through trauma or multiple instances of trauma, and it can also be a result of gender dysphoria and not feeling aligned in your body and the impact that can have on your well-being. It can also have an impact on whether you're depressed or anxious or how comfortable you are in different spaces. So a lot of members of our community have a lot of challenges in that respect, including higher risk of suicide pretty much across the board, but especially for our youth and for trans people in our community and trans people of color. And it's bad. The statistics are not good. And so it's important that we are mindful of how important all of this is, and understanding our community and being able to support them is really important to people's well-beings and safety. So in addition to the discrimination that people can face, many members of our community have limited social networks, whether that's because they went through tragedies as they were young or as they moved through their lives and lost the support systems that they had, or because their families or friends were not accepting of who they are, and then they're on their own. And it can be a really hard world to be in on your own, especially if you're lacking resources or if people don't understand who you are. So not having social networks and familial support in the same ways that maybe straight people or cisgender people have can have an impact on us. Because if we have something bad happen in our lives, most of us rely on those support networks to help us get through it, whether that's emotionally or monetarily or in some other ways. So not having that support, in addition to not feeling like you have someone in your corner, can have a real big impact on your life. So social isolation is a really big issue in our community as well, along those same lines. Humans are social creatures. We need that interaction to varying degrees, depending on who we are, but not being able to have somebody who you can trust, who cares about you, can have a real impact on your well-being overall and the opportunities that you have. And again, fewer options for help when you are in need. And here's some examples specifically in healthcare. So many people in our community expect discrimination when they go to a provider rather than fear it. So to me, that's a pretty big difference. If you fear having a negative reaction because of your experiences, that is a problem in and of itself. But if you expect to be discriminated against because it has happened to you before, or because people that you know have experienced discrimination, that's a lot to carry into a primary care appointment, for example, or some other kind of healthcare setting. When you're trying to do something to take care of yourselves, to expect discrimination can really be a large barrier for someone to overcome. And it's a big reason why a lot of folks in our community don't always go to the doctor, or they take a lot of time to try to figure out who is safe and who isn't, because it can be incredibly harmful to go somewhere and be discriminated against when you're trying to receive care, and when the people you are receiving care from are expected to and take an oath to care for you regardless of who you are. So this results in many people avoiding or delaying care, which of course can impact their health outcomes in the short term and the long term, because as we know, one issue today that might be small, if you don't address it, can it like expand and grow over time and become more serious. And so if you're avoiding preventive care or getting follow-up care because of the discrimination you expect or because of your own fears, that's going to impact your health. There are also quite a few barriers to insurance, to accessing care in general. Again, if we think back to that sort of systems perspective of if you don't have income because no one will hire you, then you probably don't have a car or transportation is difficult. How do you then get to these appointments? Or how do you get insurance that is going to support your needs? So that can be a big issue for lots of members of our community. And the final point on here is there are many instances of providers themselves being uncomfortable supporting our community or not having the knowledge or experience that they need to care. So I've heard many stories of people who identify as LGBTQ+ who have expressed that when they go to their primary care physician or when they go to any healthcare setting, they have had to educate their provider on their care. So they have to tell them about the medications that they're taking, or what support they need, or the barriers that they're facing. And I think it's fairly safe to say that none of us want to go into a medical professional's office who are trusting with our health, which is foundational to our ability to exist, and then have to educate that person on us. That can be about us and how we need care. That can be really difficult, and it will be hard to trust the healthcare system if that was our experience. So that's something that a lot of folks face, especially members of the trans community, are often put in the position of not only being discriminated against and misgendered, but also having to educate their providers, which may mean they just don't get the care that they need and that they deserve. So before I start talking more about allyship, I want to pause and see if there are any questions right now about intersectionality, about challenges our community faces.
We don't have anything in the chat at this moment.
Okay, great. Again, if something comes up, feel free to interrupt. There will also be time at the end for questions, so you're also welcome to hold them for now. So I've talked a little bit about allyship. Some of you have given some really good examples of how you have been allies in the past or how you would intend to be allies, and that's wonderful. And so I want to take some time to talk about what allyship means and some ideas of how you can be an ally. So an ally is someone who is not part of the community or does not hold the same identity as somebody else, but who is willing and acts on providing support and advocating for them, showing up for them. Is very much an identity that you earn and not one that you can label yourself. So you couldn't just decide, like, I'm going to say that I'm an ally, put it on a name badge, pat myself on the back, and feel good for the day that I did something. It's really about action and how you earn that title. So even members of our community can be allies. So I've mentioned that I'm a white cisgender woman, so I hold a lot of privilege in many spaces, and it's my responsibility to be an ally for the trans folks in our community, the non-binary folks, for people of color in our community, for people with disabilities, and the list goes on. But it's my responsibility to use my privilege and the role that I have, especially in this organization, to be an ally, to advocate for more inclusive policies, to stand up for people, to try to create partnerships for different groups, to make sure everybody feels represented and that we're not missing things based on our biases. So those are some ways that I try to be an ally, even though I am still a member of the LGBTQ+ community. And certainly those things can apply to folks who don't identify as part of the community. So I have a list of examples of how you can be an ally, and some of them are things that we've already talked about. So encouraging the proper use of names and pronouns, whether that's, you know, educating a colleague of yours who isn't very comfortable using them, but you can provide some information, maybe practice with them, or remind them when they misgender somebody, how they can respond and what pronouns to use. That's a great way to be an ally. If you hear or see someone being discriminated against based on their identity, you can step in and try to help. You can be open, supportive, and non-judgmental. That can have a big impact on people, just to be a safe space for someone to be themselves and not worry about what's going to happen. And then again, like I've mentioned a few times, educating yourself about our community, its needs and concerns. So being part of this training today, being open to learning and expressing the barriers that you are facing as you try to be an ally is in itself a form of allyship. So that can continue. There's always education to be done. I'm learning on a regular basis, and I'm part of this community, and I work at a community center that serves it, but there's still a lot that I don't know because I don't know everybody's experiences. So it's my responsibility to learn as much as I can, to listen to people when they share their lived experiences and really take that on so that I'm being mindful of everybody's backgrounds and what I can do to be a more supportive ally. So some other ways that you can be an ally are adjusting your language. So in addition to avoiding assuming pronouns about somebody, and using the proper pronouns or using they, them as a default, or just asking somebody's pronouns. These are some other examples of common language that we often use in different scenarios that is gendered or has a specific gender identity attached to it. And then on the right side, some language that we could use instead that might be more inclusive and help create a safer space, because language while it's not everything, it does have power. And the language that you use can help create a safe environment for somebody. And that includes both your conversations with people as well as your brochures, information you have on your website, your forms. All of those are ways that you can help make sure that people feel like they are welcome and they are going to be included, because we can, right now the boxes are small. And if we can widen those boxes by using more inclusive language, then more people are going to feel comfortable existing in those spaces, including the people who liked the language as it was before. So we're not cutting anyone out by shifting to more inclusive language. We're just opening ourselves up to more people, which I think serves everybody. So I'm not going to read through each of these individually. I'm sure you've had a chance while I've been talking to review some of them, but I'll highlight a couple that I have been using more often. So ladies and gentlemen is a pretty common term that is used to provide respect, to show respect. So the intention of many people when they say ladies and gentlemen is to be very respectful, and that's a good intention to have. But again, it's gendered language, so it wouldn't necessarily be language that would make members of our community feel welcome. And certainly some members of our community would appreciate that language, but not everyone. So instead of saying ladies and gentlemen when you're addressing a group of people, you could say folks or friends or y'all, especially if you're Southern, or you can say everyone. And there are some other terms that you could try out. But it's important to think about the words that you're using and the context of them, their history, and whether or not they are gendered unnecessarily. So one thing that I haven't quite figured out, and maybe you all have some ideas, but the sir and ma'am terms. I've asked many people. I haven't heard a real replacement for that yet, because again, it's intended to be very respectful and many people really appreciate that. But so far I haven't heard any alternatives to that that are less gendered. So that's something that I'm still exploring and asking questions about and trying to get a sense of, because I want to make sure that I'm being as inclusive as I can in my language. And I choose not to say sir or ma'am. I'll say like excuse me or pardon me if I'm trying to get someone's attention. But in terms of like actual replacements for those terms, I haven't heard anything yet. So if you have heard something that might be good to try, feel free to put that in the chat or let me know afterwards. Something that I'm going to continue to explore along with lots of other language. So again, language isn't everything, but it doesn't matter. So that's a good first step, is to work on your language. And then there are certainly bigger ways to be an ally and contribute. So I have some examples of what allyship in healthcare can look like. I know many of you work in health settings or are connected with healthcare, and especially because there's so much need for our community in terms of health, it's important for me to spend a little time talking about what allyship in healthcare can look like. And this could certainly apply to other contexts as well, but just to give this as an example. So I am a social worker, I'm a macro social worker, and I'm a systems thinker. So I am constantly grappling with all of the different systems that impact our lived experiences and barriers that they can create, as well as opportunity. So I've divided this into provider level and into system level, because I think we need to be working on both simultaneously. There are things we can do on a day-to-day basis in our interpersonal interactions with people that can really help somebody's lived experience and be a good way to be an ally. And there are also things that we can do on the systems level that can help change the way that these systems operate to make them more inclusive, that can help on a bigger scale, but often the system level change requires more work, more collaboration. But I think they're both important to do, so I wanted to give some ideas of what allyship can look like at both levels. So on the provider level, again, educating yourself, seeking out resources, sharing your pronouns and asking your patient's pronouns or whoever you're interacting with, letting folks take the lead on their care and what they want to share with you, and ask if you're not sure how to help. It's also good to avoid making assumptions about what they're looking for or who they are. So one thing that has happened to me is when I've gone into a doctor's office and they ask, are you sexually active? And I say yes. And they say, is there any chance you're pregnant? And I say no, because there isn't. And they're like, wait, how is that possible? Are you sure? So instead of having that reaction and being uncertain, just believe somebody when they share that information with you, because it can be uncomfortable to have to, let me walk you through why this is the case. Another important note is to be conscious of body language. As I'm sure you all know, we don't always say how we're feeling. Sometimes we show it more. And some people don't show it at all. It just depends on the individual. But many people will show in their body language how comfortable or uncomfortable they are in a situation. So if you can see someone physically shutting down and they're not telling you that they're shutting down, it's generally good to take a pause and check in and see what's going on, how that person's feeling. Because it could be that you accidentally said something that misgendered them or that made them feel uncomfortable. It could be their own fears around healthcare that are impacting it. It could be something entirely unrelated to the care. But if you can be aware of body language and how someone is demonstrating how they're feeling, it can help you be better positioned to provide support and check in to see what else they might need. So again, using they, them, their pronouns, gender neutral pronouns as a default, if you don't know somebody's pronouns, or to just ask somebody's pronouns, and avoiding outing somebody unless it's necessary for their care or it's expressly permitted. Another issue that often comes up is that if somebody's in an emergency situation, especially, or if somebody's there in a supportive capacity for their partner, sometimes there are some hoops that people have to jump through in order to be able to be in the room, like proving that you're married and proving that you belong there, that you're family. And that can be both a provider level and a system level. But again, to just be mindful of what people are bringing into the space, to try to believe them as much as possible, because we all need support in difficult times. And if somebody has that, and obviously there's more to it than that, I know, but that's a good way to be an ally. Another issue that could come up is if you are working with somebody and they have somebody with them, but you don't know what their relationship is and whether the person that you're there to care for is comfortable with that other individual knowing their identity. So for example, if it's a young person who's getting care and is out to you because you've had that conversation, but not out to their parent who's in the room with them, that could be a tricky situation to navigate, and it's better to avoid bringing up things related to that identity until you've had a chance to speak to that individual receiving care privately, to check in and see what they're comfortable sharing and what they're not comfortable sharing. So there's a lot of little examples here and there and situations that will come up depending on the context, but there's a lot of ways that you can be an ally and really just help somebody's experience be better. So if we shift to the system level, some of the things we can do are advocate for inclusive policies. So that can mean who's allowed to visit somebody who's receiving care, or what we ask on our forms when somebody comes in. So that's the last thing on the list, updating your forms to have more inclusive options for gender identity, so that people see themselves represented or feel like they can fully represent themselves on their forms, and then be treated accordingly with the correct pronouns, gender identity, and things of that nature. You can also work to develop partnerships and resource lists. So there are lots of organizations like Affirmations. I could give you a list of many others that are doing amazing work in the state of Michigan and Southeast Michigan. But developing partnerships with people who have that lived experience, who serve that community, can help with education on a broader level and can help make everybody feel more comfortable and develop resource lists and have somewhere to refer folks if they're looking for follow-up resources. So another system level way to be an ally is to support providers. So if you're in a sort of administrative position or leadership position and you have providers who aren't experienced necessarily with our community, or who have some questions or some barriers, you could provide that support to them, whether that's training opportunities like today, or listening and answering questions, whatever that looks like. But providing support to those people who are going to be interacting with individuals in our community on a regular basis is one way to be helpful. Signs, visuals, other media on the website, in office spaces, in centers, whatever that looks like, can be a really good way of demonstrating your allyship, which can mean flags, like rainbow flags that represent our community can be one way to demonstrate it. Having your pronouns on your name badges or in your email signatures is a way to demonstrate that you're an ally. Having visuals that include same-sex, same-gender couples or more diverse individuals can help demonstrate that you're a safer space. So those are some of the provider level and system level recommendations that I have for how to be an ally, especially in healthcare settings. But again, much of this can apply in other contexts as well. So I'd encourage you to think about the spaces that you're in, the power that you have, whether that's small things or if you have a lot of power, and what ways you could maybe help make things better for people, help create better experiences for individuals. Okay, so that's all the material. I know it's a lot, and I've been talking for a very long time, but I want to pause and answer any questions that you all have at this time.
So feel free to unmute yourself and ask that question or type in the chat as well, and I'll read them out.
I just wanted to share that I mentioned it in the chat in the very beginning when we were introducing ourselves, but I actually interned at Affirmations in 2019 for my counseling program for my master's.
Awesome.
And it was one of the best experiences I've ever had. I always considered myself an ally to the community and the culture, but to be fully immersed into it, I'm not going to lie, it was definitely kind of a culture shock in a way. But to get very familiar with introducing yourself with your pronouns and making it so comfortable for that person that's entering the building to where it's not a jarring moment. It's not an awkward thing. It's just so fluidly coming out of your mouth. Like, this is just how we introduce ourselves here kind of thing. And to see how relaxed people were in entering the building and walking through the building and feeling comfortable walking through the building, even if they didn't identify with the culture, the community themselves, was just it was a really eye-opening and enlightening experience. And I feel even more connected today because I did that.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for working with us. I'm sorry I wasn't here when you were here.
Oh gosh, I wish you were. You sound wonderful.
Yeah, you're welcome to come back and volunteer or be part of things. We always look for more engagement, but we have people who aren't part of our community working in our center on a regular basis, interning, volunteering, being supportive, and those are true allies, and we need that, because not only is that helping us meet the needs of the community, but it's helping more allies feel more comfortable using that language and understanding us so that it's not uncomfortable anymore. Even if you've never met somebody like the person that walks into the door, you're still more prepared and you're comfortable. And I think that's wonderful. So thank you. I really appreciate you sharing that. What else? Comments, questions, concerns? I'm open to all of them.
I don't see anything in the chat, but just to let you know, I did drop your guys' website in the chat. So if anyone is, interested in volunteering, like you said, you can click on that link and head to the support and volunteer section.
Awesome. Yeah, and I have a slide at the very end with my contact information as well. But I want to, as the last thing that we do, either give you this question to respond to now, or it can be something to ponder. But I want us all to think about how we're going to use what we've learned today, what we've discussed today in the future, whether that's in your personal life and your understanding of our community, or that's in your professional spaces, and how you can be more supportive or change your mindset, or what more resources you need. I think it's beneficial for us all to take some time to think about how we're going to use new information in the future. And that's something that I always try to do. And if people are willing to share what they would like to do or hope to do in the future based on today, I would love to hear it, but it's certainly not a requirement. So I'll do another quick pause, give folks a chance to respond in case.
So someone put in the chat that they're going to print out the gender Redman and place it straight on their desk.
Cool.
So yeah, and then something that you know, this reminded me of is in my old office or my old cube, I used to have, you know, a little pride flag so people would know that this is a safe space. And I don't have that in my new cube, so that was a reminder for me to display that.
That's great. Yeah, little things can make a big difference. I can tell you when I enter new spaces, I'm looking for those cues. Whether or not it's going to impact the way that I exist in those spaces, I like to know, like, is this a safe space? Like, can I relax a little bit here? If I have an issue, can I feel comfortable sharing it? So sometimes those little things can really make a big difference in helping someone feel comfortable in a space, even if it seems like something very small to you, can have a big impact. So things like that are great.
One way that I will use what I learned today is that I'm going to Google more and look at the resources and just try to learn more about it. I had what was talked about today bring up a lot of questions, so I'm going to Google and try to look into more.
Yeah, and questions are great. There's a lot to learn, and especially if much of this is new, it can take some time to get used to it. There's a lot of nuances as well as big picture things. So I think continuing to look for resources is great. I want to make sure I mention when we're looking for resources on Google, just be careful of your sources. You never really know where people are coming from or their agenda. But if you go first to the organizations that are supportive or serving the LGBTQ+ community and look for resources there, or places who say, like, I'm a member of this community, this is my story, those can be more beneficial than others. Though certainly I think there's a lot of really good information on the internet. So that's a great thing to work on.
Now, you gave us your website. Are there resources? You might have already said this, but are there resources on your website as well?
Not many educational resources. We have resources for, like, members of our community. There is a glossary of terms that's on our website under resources. So that might be helpful. It just has some common definitions. But I can certainly, if you wanted to email me and look for resources, I can try to help connect you. But I want to mention, while we're on the subject, some other local organizations that have resources as well or could answer different questions. So there's the Ruth Ellis Center located in Detroit that serves largely youth, especially youth of color and those that have been involved in the foster care system or juvenile justice system, those with great need, homeless youth especially. LGBT Detroit is located in Detroit and generally serves the Black population within our community, but also a broader population as well. Stand With Trans is an organization that serves youth and their parents who are transgender, where the youth are transgender or non-binary. So they have resources and support groups. Transcend the Binary is an organization by trans folks for trans folks, especially thinking about healthcare. So they have ways to connect to resources. They have lots of information. SAGE of Metro Detroit is part of the larger SAGE organization nationally that works with older adults in our community. They have a lot of great resources. And there are many, many more, but those are some of the common ones that we work with. So I would encourage you to check out their websites, look them up, contact them if you have questions or looking to connect people with resources, because I don't want to give the impression that Affirmations does everything, because I don't believe that any organization can do everything. I think we're all better off if we collaborate, share resources, partner with each other to help serve the community. So I want to make sure to lift up those wonderful organizations that are doing great work in our community as well. And I'm sure we'll be happy to be resources for you all.
So I did try to drop some links to those resources that you mentioned in the chat for people that want those. And then we do have 2 questions. I'm not sure if you would have information off the top of your head, but someone is looking for resources for younger LGBTQ+ students, and another is looking for resources for asexual individuals. So if you or anyone else in the group has some good resources that they know of, please share.
Yeah, so I'll start with the second one first. I don't know of any specific resources, for asexual folks, but that's something I want us to do more of, because that's we need to be serving those individuals as well. We do have a lot of support and discussion groups that are listed on our website. So I would encourage folks to check it out. Some coming out groups, some groups for trans folks specifically, some are just social groups. So if someone isn't looking for like support, but just wants community, we have a lot for that. So in addition to that, we also have lots of youth programs. So if you know of a young person who either wants to be involved in our more intensive leadership and development program, that's a really good opportunity to get a curriculum-based education, meet with a group on a regular basis, potentially have an internship opportunity afterwards. We also have a youth drop-in, which is on Discord now, so youth can just go whenever they want and chat with other young people. So those are some great resources we have for youth, but Stand With Trans specifically serves youth. The Ruth Ellis Center specifically serves youth. So those would probably be good places to start if you're looking for other options outside of what Affirmations provides. But if anyone wants to email me individually and ask for some recommendations, I can either give you more information or point you in the direction of somebody else who might be able to help more. I'd be happy to do that.
And then we did have one more comment in the chat. This person is just saying they're going to continue to use open-minded language, and also they gave you some applause, Kathleen.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And this is, you all being here is wonderful. I know you all have busy lives. Everyone has a lot going on, but taking some time out to be open to learning and listening to me and being a safe space for me to share about myself, I really appreciate it. And I want to make sure you all understand that it's okay to be at whatever stage in the learning process that you're at. We're all coming from different backgrounds, and it's okay to be unsure about things. So that's what I'm here for. That's what a lot of people are here for. Just continue to be patient with yourself, show yourselves a little bit of grace, and the rest of us as well as we try to navigate things. But thank you all for having me and for your time. And again, I'm always here if I can be a resource. And yeah, we've got a lot of good things coming at Affirmations in the future, so keep an eye out for what's coming up.
Thank you so much, Kathleen, for your expertise, knowledge, and for sharing those personal experiences. I know I may speak for everyone here. We really, really appreciate you coming and speaking with us today. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for moderating the chat and dealing with all of my tech issues.
Absolutely, no problem. And then just so everyone knows, this was recorded, so it will be up on the Oakland Community Health Network website at a later date. And I am going to drop in a training evaluation. This is totally optional. This is how we improve our future trainings. So if you wouldn't mind filling that out, we would appreciate it. And I will hang out here for a few more minutes if anyone has any other questions. And then we do have one more session of this held August 9th, I believe. Yes, August 9th from 2 to 4 p.m. So I'll drop that link in the chat if anyone knows anyone, that might be interested in attending that session as well.
Hey, thank you all. Take care. Thanks for all that you do.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. Have a great one.
You too.